Section 1.5. Risks and Challenges when using Copilot. Now that we're all pumped up about getting Copilot to write code for us, we need to talk about the dangers inherent in using AI assistants. Copyright. Copilot learned how to program using human-written code. You'll hear people use the word train when talking about AI tools like Copilot. In this context, training is another word for learning. More specifically, it was trained using millions of GitHub repositories containing open-source code. One worry is that Copilot will steal that code and give it to us. In our experience, Copilot doesn't often suggest a large chunk of someone else's code, but that possibility is there. Even if the code that Copilot gives us is a melding and transformation of various bits of other people's code, there may still be licensing problems. For example, who owns the code produced by Copilot? There is currently no consensus on the answer. The Copilot team is adding features to help. For example, Copilot can tell you whether the code that it produced is similar to already existing code and what the license is on that code. Learning and experimenting on your own is great, and we encourage that, but take care if you intend to use this code for purposes beyond your home. We're intentionally a bit vague here because it may take some time for laws to catch up to this new technology. It's best to play it safe while these debates are had within society. Education. As instructors of introductory programming courses ourselves, we've seen firsthand how well Copilot does on the types of assignments we've given our students in the past. In one study, Copilot was asked to solve 166 common introductory programming tasks. How well did it do? On its first attempt, it solved almost 50% of these problems. Give Copilot a little more information, and that number goes up to 80%. Education needs to change in light of tools like Copilot, and instructors are currently discussing how these changes may look. At some schools, students are allowed to use Copilot to aid in their learning and on their assignments. At other schools, Copilot isn't allowed in some contexts, that is, exams, or for some students, computer science majors. At many schools, LLMs are being allowed to act as tutors for students. In some cases, the LLM tutors are just regular LLMs like Copilot or ChatGPT, but in other cases, the LLM interface has been changed to restrict the kind of answers students receive. It's still too early to know how LLMs will affect computing education, but trends like these have already started to emerge. Code quality. We need to be careful not to trust Copilot, especially with sensitive code or code that needs to be secure. Code written for medical devices, for example, or code that handles sensitive user data must always be thoroughly understood. It's tempting to ask Copilot for code, marvel at the code that it produces, and accept that code without scrutiny. But that code might be plain wrong. In this book, we'll work on code that won't be deployed at large. So, while we'll focus on getting the correct code, we won't worry about the implications of using this code for broader purposes. We'll also build the foundations you'll need to independently determine whether code is correct. Code security. As with code quality, code security is absolutely not assured when we get code from Copilot. For example, if we're working with user data, getting code from Copilot isn't enough. We would need to perform security audits and have expertise to determine that the code is secure. Again, though, we won't be using code from Copilot in real-world scenarios, so we won't focus on security concerns. Not an expert. One of the markers of being an expert is awareness of what one knows, and equally important, what one doesn't. Experts are also often able to state how confident they are in their response, and if they aren't confident enough, they will learn further until they know that they know. Copilot and, more generally, LLMs don't do this. You ask them a question, and they answer. Plain as that. They will confabulate if necessary. They will mix bits of truth with bits of garbage into a plausible-sounding but overall nonsensical response. For example, we've seen LLMs fabricate obituaries for people who are alive, which doesn't make any sense. Yet the obituaries do contain elements of truth about people's lives. When asked why an abacus can perform math faster than a computer, we've seen LLMs come up with confident-sounding responses, including something about abacuses being mechanical and therefore necessarily the fastest. There is ongoing work in this area for LLMs to be able to say, "Sorry, no, I don't know this." But we're not there yet. They don't know what they don't know, and that means they need supervision. Bias. LLMs will reproduce the same biases present in the data on which they were trained. If you ask Copilot to generate a list of names, it will generate primarily English names. If you ask for a graph, it may produce a graph that doesn't consider perceptual differences among humans. And if you ask for code, it may produce code in a style reminiscent of how particular groups write code. After all, The demographic groups that are well represented in computing wrote most of the code in the world, and Copilot is trained on that code. Computer science and software engineering have long suffered from a lack of diversity. We can't afford to stifle diversity further, and we need to reverse the trend. We need to let more people in and allow them to express themselves in their own ways. How this will be handled with tools like Copilot is currently being worked out and is crucially important to the future of programming. However, we believe Copilot has the potential to improve diversity by lowering barriers to entry into the field.